Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, my name is David and I live in an old house that my parents left me in the 70s. It has a deep, dark basement that I rarely go down to. The basement was just used to store a few boxes of old things and some broken tools, so I hardly paid any attention to it. But everything changed one Saturday morning, when I noticed something was wrong. The night before, I had gone down to the basement to find the toolbox when the light on the ceiling was flickering. I remember every detail because the dim light made me turn on my phone flashlight. At that time, all I saw was the familiar cold concrete walls and the old wooden door leading to the backyard. But the next morning, when I went down, a new door suddenly appeared in the east corner. It stood tall, dark wood, the metal frame rusted as if it had been there for a long time. But I could swear I had never seen it before. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what I saw. Maybe I hadn't noticed it before, but that excuse was immediately dismissed because I'd lived here for more than 10 years and never missed a detail. The door didn't look new, but had scratches all over it as if it had been there for decades. I reached out to touch it. A cold air seeped through the crack, making me shiver. My heart pounded. The first thought that came to my mind was that I was witnessing the beginning of one of the most terrifying horror stories. Tried pulling the handle. It didn't budge. Was the door locked from the inside, or was it just too heavy? I wasn't sure. I pressed my ear to listen. I could hear a faint whisper, but it could just be the sound of a water pipe. I quickly stepped back. A series of questions arose in my head. Who built this door? When did it appear? And where does it lead? I couldn't concentrate on my work all day. The image of the door kept haunting me. At night, the house was quiet. I lay in bed and kept hearing a light knocking sound coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was just a mental hallucination, but the knocking kept repeating itself 3 times, as if someone had deliberately created it. I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to dispel the fear, but the more I tried to hide it, the more obvious it became. The next morning, I decided to go down and check again. I brought a flashlight, a hammer, and my phone, ready to call a friend if anything unusual happened. When I got there, the door was still there, silent but full of menace. I tried knocking lightly. It sounded hollow, as if it was an empty room inside. I thought about using a hammer to break the lock, but I hesitated. A voice in my head whispered that there were doors that should not be opened. That sentence made my skin crawl. I stepped back, about to turn away, when suddenly from behind the door came a loud noise as if something had fallen to the floor. I panicked and dropped the flashlight. In the moment, the light slanted through the crack. I swore I saw a shadow pass by. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. Sweat poured down my body. I hurriedly ran upstairs, closed the basement door tightly, and told myself I would never return. But deep down, I knew that once the door appeared, it would not disappear. It was like an invisible trap that drew my attention every day and every hour. The 3rd night passed in a state of anxiety. I clearly heard footsteps dragging on the concrete floor coming from the basement. Not only that, there was also a sound like fingernails scratching on wood. I tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. In the morning, my eyes were dark, my head was heavy. I began to doubt myself. Was I going crazy? To check, I called my best friend Michael and asked him to come over. I didn't say what was going on, just that I needed him to help me look at the basement because I heard strange noises. When Michael arrived, I led him down to the basement. As soon as he saw the door, he stopped, his eyes confused. He was certain that he had not seen this thing when he had visited my house last week. A chill ran down my spine as it proved that I had not imagined it. Michael knocked a few times curiously. The door shook but remained silent. He joked that maybe the back was just an unfinished space that the builder had forgotten. But we both knew that this was not a simple matter, because the house had been there for over 50 years, and no one in my family had ever mentioned any sealed rooms. As we turned away again, the sound from inside rang out. This time, a soft whisper that was unclear but definitely not the sound of wind. Michael's face changed. He looked at me and nodded, signaling that we should leave immediately. We both rushed up the stairs and slammed the basement door. I could hear my friend's heavy breathing. It was not the reaction of someone who was easily scared. He is a strong man, but is also haunted at the moment. After Michael left. I sat alone in the living room, my thoughts in turmoil. The door was more than just a piece of architecture. It was like a portal to something beyond my understanding. I could feel an invisible presence watching my every move. And I knew this was only the beginning of the horrors I was about to face. After Michael had witnessed the strange door in the basement, I thought I would at least have an ally, someone to confirm that I wasn't crazy. But the truth scared me even more. Michael texted me that day and said he didn't want to come back to my house again. He said briefly that the door wasn't normal and that he sensed something that didn't belong in this world. Those short but haunting messages made me understand that I had to face it myself. I tried to ignore the door's existence for the next few days. I didn't go down to the basement, didn't mention it, and went about my daily chores. But at night, things were different. The whispering started again, at first faint like wind whistling through a crack in the door, but it grew clearer. I lay in bed in the dark, eyes wide open and my heart pounding. It sounded like someone was calling my name from deep below. Each syllable echoed and then faded away. I reassured myself that it was just my imagination, that I was too tired. But the whispering continued regularly. On the 5th night, I woke up at 3 a.m. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock. I listened and then heard very slow footsteps coming from the basement. They dragged on, as if someone was deliberately emphasizing each beat. I didn't dare get out of bed. My whole body was numb. The horrible thought crossed my mind that maybe the door had opened and something was coming out there. Next morning, I decided to try again to confirm. I took my phone with me, turned on the recorder, and slowly walked down to the basement. The musty smell made me choke. The door was still standing there, but what terrified me was that the doorknob had turned as if someone had touched it. I held the phone up to the crack of the door, trying to record any sound. And then I heard a clear whisper, a low, drawn-out voice that sounded like it was coming from underground. It wasn't in a familiar language, but it had a hypnotic rhythm that sent shivers down my spine. I rushed upstairs and slammed the basement door shut, my hands shaking. I still shivered when I listened to the recording. There was only a heavy, windy hum, but at the end there was a clear, faint sentence that sounded like Old English. I could only make out one word, open. That one word alone was enough to keep me awake for several nights. I began to wonder if the thing inside was human or some other entity trying to communicate. The next day, I decided to call an old acquaintance, Sarah, who used to research paranormal phenomena. When I told her, she was silent for a long time and then told me not to touch that door again. She said there were ghost stories that originated from mysterious portals leading to another world, where restless souls were imprisoned. I was half believing, but the serious look in her eyes over the video call made me not dare to joke. Sarah suggested I leave the recorder in the basement overnight to see if I could get more evidence. I did, placing the old one against the door and locking the basement. The next morning, I was shaking when I listened again. At first, it was just static and insects, but around 2 a.m., there was a very strange sound. The whispers merged into many voices, like a crowd whispering at the same time. In the overlapping sounds, I clearly heard my name being called. It couldn't be a coincidence. They knew me, knew my presence outside the door. The growing fear made me lose sleep. My face was gaunt, my eyes sunken from many sleepless nights. I tried to share it with a few other friends, but no one believed me. They thought I was having a mental health problem. Only Sarah and I knew that this was more serious than anything we had ever heard. She warned me absolutely not to open the door, but at the same time emphasized that its appearance could signal a terrible event the next night. As I was falling asleep, a nightmare came. In my dream, I saw myself standing in front of the door, my hand automatically turning the latch. When the door opened, it was an endless dark corridor. From inside, there were dozens of cold, bony arms reaching out and grabbing me. I struggled, screamed, but could not escape. I woke up, drenched in sweat. My hands were red marks, as if someone had squeezed them. I looked down and could not deny the fact that what was happening was no longer vague. That door not only existed in the basement, but also crept into my dreams. Into my body, I knew clearly that I was gradually slipping deeper into a spiral with no way out. The door was not inanimate. It had its own will. It wanted to be opened. And every night, it used whispers to entice, to weaken my determination. I don't know how much longer. I can resist before my trembling hands are forced to turn the doorknob and face the terrible truth behind. After the horrible dream and the red bruises on my hands, I began to realize that things were getting out of control. I tried to reason with my mind, but the more I tried to find a reasonable explanation, the more I was drawn into the fear. During the day, I was busy with work, trying to forget, but when night fell, the whispers appeared again. Not only in my ears, but also echoed throughout the room, as if the spirits were creeping around me. I turned up the music to drown it out, but the more I did, the more chaotic the sound became, like a choir in the dark. I called Sarah for help. She came to the house in the afternoon and brought some strange objects, including rosemary, wind chimes, and a thick book. She said these could help create a protective circle against negative energy. I watched her arrange the basement with skepticism, but at least having someone with me helped me feel less scared. When she placed candles around the basement, the pale yellow light cast on the cold wall, making the door look even more terrifying. Sarah closed her eyes and chanted some spell, her voice steady. I stood beside her, trying to stay calm, but at that moment a loud knock sounded from inside the door, making us both jump. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at me, her face pale. She said something was trapped and it was trying to escape. She advised me not to open the door no matter what. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to believe it was just a natural phenomenon, but deep down I knew there was some darkness lurking beyond. That night I couldn't sleep. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, the house shook slightly as if someone was banging on the walls. I jumped up and looked out the window, but it was quiet outside. Then I heard footsteps coming from the basement, this time louder and heavier. I trembled, as I walked down the stairs, my heart pounding. The door was still closed, but a faint blue light emanated from the crack, like a will-o'-the-wisp. I backed away, quickly closed the basement door and rushed to my room, locking myself in the blanket like a child. But even after hiding, I still felt someone watching me. The next morning, Sarah called to ask about the situation. I told her, and she advised me to leave the house for a few days to sever the connection. I intended to obey, but when I packed my things, something strange happened. All the clocks in the house stopped at 3 in the morning, the hands frozen as if frozen. My phone also hung up at that moment. I clearly felt that the darkness did not want me to go anywhere. I decided to try one last time to find out the root cause. I carried a camera in front of the door all night. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, I almost dropped the camera. In the video, there was a moment when light flashed from the crack in the door and the shadow of a tall, thin man appeared clearly for a few seconds and then disappeared. The shadowy figure stood close to the door, his face long and his eyes were dark and sunken. The sight left me breathless, my hands clenched until they bled. I knew I couldn't continue to ignore it. I told Sarah. She was silent for a long time and then said that I might be living in a cursed house. The door wasn't newly created, but something that had existed for a long time, just waiting for an opportunity to manifest. Those words reminded me of a story my father told me when I was little, that the basement of this house was built on the old ground that used to be a massed grave. I always thought it was just a threat, but now the pieces began to fit together that night. When the rain started to patter on the roof, I heard a soft laugh coming from the basement. It was no longer a whisper, but clearly as if someone was mocking me. I screamed in desperation to ask it to be quiet, but the more I screamed, the louder the laughter became. I knelt down, holding my head, tears streaming down my face. I knew I was losing control, gradually being overwhelmed by the darkness behind the door. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of more horrors to come. I lost count of the number of nights I spent in constant fear. The laughter in the basement was like daggers in my mind, making it impossible for me to sleep. Sarah called to remind me to leave, but I felt like I was tied to this house, as if the door was tied to me by an invisible string. I wanted to run away, but every time I reached the main door, my whole body felt heavy. My hands trembled, unable to open the latch. Something was holding me back, forcing me to stay here to witness the horrors that lay ahead. That day, I tried to convince myself that it was all just a mental breakdown. I mustered up the courage to go down to the basement, this time with a bottle of holy water that Sarah had given me. The air in the basement was so cold that my breath turned into white wisps. I approached the door and poured holy water on the wooden frame. At that moment, I heard an angry screech like a wounded animal, and at the same time, the wooden surface shook violently. I backed away in panic. The water bottle fell to the floor and shattered. A cold air escaped from the crack in the door, extinguishing all the candles in the cellar. When the lights suddenly went out, I shone my flashlight towards the door and almost collapsed. On the wooden surface appeared hand-shaped burnt lines stretching from the inside out. There was no denying that something was trying to escape. I rushed up the stairs and slammed the door shut, my whole body trembling. A crazy thought rushed through my head that perhaps this door was more than just an object. It was a curse sealed decades ago. That night, I tried to stay up all night to record every phenomenon. At exactly 3 a.m., when the rain outside began to pour heavily, I heard footsteps circling the living room. I knew I was upstairs and all the doors were locked, but the sound echoed clearly. I walked lightly down the stairs, my heart pounding. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped, my eyes wide open. The basement door was no longer closed, but was now open a few inches, emitting a faint, ghostly green light. At the same time, the whispering sounded again, this time urgent and urgent, as if calling me to come closer. I quickly ran back up to my room and put a chair in front of the bedroom door. I hid there, my ear pressed against the pillow to block out the whispering, but it was useless. The sound had penetrated my head, seeped into my veins, making me tremble. I fell asleep in fear, and when I woke up, it was morning, the sunlight streaming through the window like a lifesaver. I ran down to the basement, but the door was closed as if it had never been opened. Everything was so quiet that I began to doubt my own memory. Sarah came at noon with a silver amulet. She said that the curse was too strong and that I might be its direct target. She advised me to never be alone again. Listening to her, I intended to move to Michael's house, but he refused, saying that he did not want to get involved anymore. The feeling of abandonment rose up and choked me. I knew I had to fight on my own. No one was brave enough to be by my side anymore. That night, while I was sitting on the bed, a strong wind blew open the window. Rain splashed in and soaked the curtains. I quickly ran out to close it, and when I came back in, I saw a handprint on the bedsheet, soaked with wetness. I stood there, stunned. The room was cold. It was clear that something was present in my most private space. I trembled and whispered in despair, praying that this was just an illusion. But deep inside, I knew that the basement door was gradually expanding its influence. From there, the darkness crept into every corner of the house, every corner of my mind, and once it gained enough power, perhaps nothing could stop it anymore. In the following days, I began to notice strange changes in my body. The next morning, I woke up to find a faint hand-shaped bruise on my wrist. I was sure that I had gone to bed completely normal last night, without any collision. At first, I tried to think that maybe I had accidentally injured myself, but as the number of marks increased on my shoulder, back, and even my neck, I knew for sure that this was no random accident. Each mark was like an invisible hand touching me while I was helplessly falling asleep. Every time I saw those marks, I felt terrified, because they were not just ordinary bruises, but often accompanied by a sharp, cold feeling from within. I began to fear even sleeping. I tried to stay awake, but at some point I still had to close my eyes. And then, when I woke up, new marks appeared on my body. I recorded them meticulously every day, taking pictures to have evidence. In each photo, my eyes became more tired and haunted, as if my soul was being sucked away. I told Sarah. She frowned and said that this was a clear sign that I had become the target of the entity behind the door. She repeatedly told me that I must not let it continue to infiltrate my daily life, or sooner or later I would no longer be myself. She advised me to leave the house immediately. I nodded in agreement, but deep down I knew that the door would not let me go. Every time I packed my things, I felt an invisible eye watching me, and my heart pounded so hard that my feet could not step past the main threshold. That night, I fell into another nightmare. In my dream, I saw myself lying on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by countless black hands reaching out from the darkness. They grabbed me tightly, leaving deep imprints on my skin. I struggled to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. When I woke up, I found at the exact spot where the dream left the pain was, new red marks had actually appeared on my body. I trembled as I realized that the boundary between dream and reality had disappeared. I tried to seek help from the church near my house, The priest listened to my story and just pondered before handing me a small cross. He advised me to pray every night to keep my faith. I brought it home to hang in my room, but on the first night I heard a continuous light knocking on the cross, as if someone was mocking that fragile protection. The knocking continued until dawn, leaving me exhausted. When the sky brightened, I saw the cross fall to the floor. The hanging rope was cut in half, as if an invisible blade had passed through it. The haunting became more and more obvious. I not only saw marks on my body, but also began to see a shadow in the mirror. Every time I washed my face and looked up, I saw a tall, thin figure behind me. His face was blurry and unclear. But when I turned around, there was no one. I knew that the darkness behind the door was creeping throughout the house, taking over every space, every vein in me. I had become the place it wanted to cling. Tessera came to visit again. When she saw the marks on my body, her eyes flashed with fear. She said that perhaps this door was not simply an object to hold the soul, but a portal between this world and another dimension. The entity inside could not step out immediately, but could send bits of energy out to attack and mark me. Those marks were clear evidence of the growing connection between me and it. Sarah said that if I did not find a way to sever the connection, I would soon be pulled to the other side. The words left me speechless. I imagined myself disappearing from this world, my body swallowed through that dark door. The thought made me shudder, but also ignited a fragile determination that I had to find a way to end it. I didn't know how, but I knew that running away wouldn't solve anything. The door had chosen me, and to survive I had to face it. After days of being continuously marked on my body, I began to realize that the house was gradually changing. The air in the house, which was already damp, now became heavy and stuffy. Each step echoed in the hallway as if it were being stretched endlessly. The dark corners that seemed familiar now seemed to contain eyes watching. The walls of the house had small, patchy cracks from which a thick, black liquid with a strong fishy smell oozed out. I wiped them away, but only a few hours later they reappeared. It seemed that the darkness from the basement door was gradually spreading out, swallowing the entire space. One morning when I woke up, I discovered that all the mirrors in the house were covered in a layer of cold mist. I wiped them away and saw that the reflection no longer matched me. The image in the mirror was half a second slower. The eyes in it looked at me with resentment. I jerked back, my heart pounding. When I turned to the other direction, the black shadow flashed in the corner of my eye again, but this time I heard a whisper. It no longer called my name, but started mentioning deep memories that no one had ever known. This proved that the entity had penetrated my mind. I tried to bring the bed to the living room to sleep, hoping that it would be safer away from the basement. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of furniture being dragged. When I turned on the light, everything had been moved from its original position. Chairs were arranged in a circle. Tables were placed close to the main door as if to block the exit. I trembled, realizing that the house no longer belonged to me. I was just a prisoner in the maze it had created. I even felt like the walls were breathing, and every time I put my ear to it, I could hear the slow beating of a heart like a giant living body. Sarah came the next day, and as soon as she entered the house, she immediately held her head and cried out in pain. She said that the evil energy had filled the entire space. She placed amulets in every corner, but they quickly burned out. She looked at me in horror and said that the door was now open wider than before. It didn't need to be hidden anymore. I led her down to the basement, and we were both stunned to see that the door was now open, almost a hand's breadth. From inside emanating a cold air. Burnt handprints spread across the wooden surface, constantly changing position as if countless people were pressing in from the other side. That night, I decided to film again. When I reviewed the footage, in addition to the moving shadows, there was the sound of a child crying. The sound was persistent, as if coming from underground, making my hair stand on end. Sarah explained that it could be the souls trapped in that dimension. They cried because they couldn't escape, but at the same time pulled me in so I wouldn't have to suffer alone. I felt both pity and panic because I knew I wasn't strong enough to fight off dozens or hundreds of those miserable souls. I began to see the effects in my daily life. At work, I kept hearing whispers in my ears, which made my colleagues look at me strangely. I couldn't concentrate, I had insomnia, and I was getting thinner. Some nights, I woke up and found myself standing right in front of the basement door, my hand gripping the doorknob. It was as if I was being hypnotized and led closer to it. If I had been a little more, I would have opened it without even realizing it. A feeling of helplessness enveloped me. I wanted to call for help, but everyone thought I was paranoid. Only Sarah was there, but even she was gradually exhausted, her face as haggard as mine. She confessed that if the situation continued, we might not survive. Hearing those words, I understood that true scary stories do not only exist in books or rumors. I was living them every day and every hour, and my ending would probably be one of the darkest pages. I began to notice a distinct change in the house every time the sun went down. The air during the day was still somewhat normal, but when night fell, the whole space was covered with an unnatural cold. Shadows appeared in every corner of the house. They were no longer just fleeting in the mirror, but moving right in my line of sight. At times, I saw a tall shadow standing motionless in the hallway, its thin body and long arms almost touching the floor. But when I turned on the light, it disappeared, leaving behind an eerie laughter. I knew clearly that the darkness from the door was gradually stepping out. One evening, Sarah came with an infrared camera. She wanted to record evidence so she could seek help from paranormal researchers. We set it up in the basement, leaving it to record all night. When the sky was just bright, we played the video again, and what appeared shocked us both. The door was opened wider, about half an arm's length, and from it came swirling black vapors. The shadowy figures moved back and forth, some of them looking straight into the lens with hollow, soulless eyes. That moment made my blood freeze, because I knew that they were aware of our existence. Sarah trembled as she turned off the camera, her eyes filled with fear. She said that these entities were not simply wandering souls. They seemed to have been imprisoned for a long time, yearning to escape, and my house had become a portal for them to be reborn. Hearing this, I felt even more desperate, feeling like I was just prey in a terrifying game that could not be stopped. I looked towards the basement and realized the painful truth that every day the door opened wider, without anyone needing to open it from the outside. That night, I was awakened by the sound of wailing and moaning from the basement. The miserable sound was like dozens of people begging to be freed at the same time. I was urged to go down, my hand trembling as I grabbed the candle. As I approached, I saw that the crack in the door had widened, a faint blue light spreading throughout the room. Suddenly, a black hand reached out, lightly touched my ankle, then pulled back. I collapsed to the floor, my heart pounding. Immediately after, the door closed as if it had never been opened. I knew I didn't have much time left. The patience of the entities on the other side was running out. tried to contact Michael again, begging him for help, but he refused. His voice trembled on the phone. He said he had a dream of me standing in the basement, waving at him, my eyes white. That dream made him swear never to come near this house again. I knew he was scared, but the loneliness made me even more desperate. I sat alone in the living room, the lights flickering. On the wall suddenly appeared streaks of words in a thick black substance. I approached and realized they were scrawled words like dried blood, summing up the sentence, "We're going out." I screamed and wiped with a towel, but the more I wiped, the darker the words became. Sarah, after seeing the evidence, finally admitted that we were dealing with a phenomenon beyond her ability. She suggested finding a paranormal research team in another city, but I feared that before they arrived, the door would be completely open. I could clearly feel the cold air spreading through the house every night, the whispers turning into screams, and the pale blue light creeping into my sleep. I was exhausted, but I also knew that I could not give up, because if this door was completely open, not only me, but the outside world could suffer. After long nights filled with whispers, at one point the sound turned into a fierce scream that almost drove me crazy. At first, it was just a few scattered screams echoing from afar, but later they became howls of pain, despair, rushing like hundreds of souls being imprisoned at the same time. I could not hide or dispel the sound in any way. Whether I turned on music, put on headphones, or even screamed loudly, the scream still overwhelmed everything, flowing into every vein, every breath. It became a part of the air in the house that I could not escape. That night, when the rain poured down outside, I sat huddled in the living room, the lights flickering as if about to go out. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through and the window flew open. I clearly heard the scream coming from the basement, this time no longer covered up but resounding throughout the house. I stood up, my whole body trembling, but still compelled to go down to the basement. My feet no longer belonged to me. Each heavy step dragged down each step. When I arrived, I saw the door was wider than ever, enough for a person to crawl through. A dim blue light shone out, accompanied by dark shadows hovering in the cracks of the door. I stopped, my heart pounding violently as if it was about to burst. From inside came chaotic sounds. There were cries, groans, and even voices calling my name. I was terrified when I heard the voice of my mother, who had died many years ago, clearly ringing out. She called me by my childhood nickname, her voice trembling as if begging. Tears welled up in my eyes. My heart wanted to explode, but my reason screamed that it was just a trick. I knew the entity on the other side was using memories and emotions to lure me into opening the door. I used all my strength to retreat, clutching my head, screaming in despair when I was about to run away. A strong wind blew out from the crack of the door and threw me to the floor. I slid down the cold concrete floor, feeling as if invisible hands were trying to hold me. I screamed for someone to save me, but there was no one in the house except me and the echoing screams. In that moment, I saw the silhouette of a tall man standing in the blue light, his pitch-black eyes staring at me. His face was distorted and unrecognizable. Only the utmost hatred remained. I was stunned and quickly crawled back up the stairs, slammed the door shut, and blocked it with all the things I could find. I sat motionless by the door all night, my heart pounding. The screams did not stop, but continued until dawn. When the sunlight shone through the window, the sound gradually faded. I sat exhausted, soaked in sweat, my eyes red from staying up all night. I knew that the door was no longer just a threat, but had actually opened a path. Whatever was lurking on the other side could reach out. And if I don't stop them, they'll soon flood this world. Sarah returned the next afternoon, and when she saw my appearance, she was shocked. When I told her what had happened, her face paled. She said she had heard of an ancient but extremely dangerous sealing ritual. It required facing the door directly, placing a seal to lock it. If it failed, not only me, but the person performing it would be pulled into the other side. I looked at her, my eyes filled with despair, but deep down I knew I had no other choice. The door was opening wider and wider. Time was running out. I nodded, accepting that even if it meant sacrificing everything, I had to end this horror that night. As the wind howled outside, Sarah and I prepared everything. She placed a salt ring around the basement, lit a candle, and took out the tattered old book. I stood in the middle of the ring, holding the amulet in my trembling hand. As the ritual began, the door shook violently, and from within came angry, thunderous roars. I felt the chill seep into my bones, and my legs could barely stand. But I knew that this was my last chance. If I did not persevere, everything would end in darkness. The cellar seemed to have turned into an arena of fragile light and angry darkness. I stood in the middle of the salt circle, my trembling hands clutching the silver amulet, while Sarah chanted the incantations from the ancient book. Each word made the door shake more violently. From inside came a furious scream. The air was heavy, as if hundreds of invisible hands were pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. The candle around the salt circle was about to go out, the weak yellow light wavering in the thick darkness. Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, but I could hear the trembling in each sentence she read. Suddenly, a strong wind blew open the cellar door, causing the salt circle to shake. Some parts were blown away by the wind, revealing gaps. Immediately, from there dark shadows slithered in, distorted shapes like giant snakes. I shouted for Sarah to quickly complete the ritual, but she only had time to respond with a look of fear. I raised the amulet, feeling my hand burn like fire. The black shadows rushed into the circle, but when they touched the light from the spell, they screamed in pain and then disappeared into black smoke. But they did not stop. A series of skinny hands reached out from the crack in the door, reaching down to the floor. I clearly saw their fingers were abnormally long, their sharp nails scratching the concrete floor, creating a terrifying sound. Sarah screamed and continued to chant the spell, her voice gradually becoming more resonant, as if empowered. Each word made the cellar shake, the walls cracked, and dust fell everywhere. I knew clearly that this was the final battle. Either we would successfully seal it, or everyone would be dragged to the other side. A tall figure appeared more clearly from the crack in the door. It was the distorted face I had seen in the green light. He glared at me. His deep eyes were as dark as a bottomless pit. His voice echoed directly in my head, not through sound, just a hateful thought. He promised to give me unlimited power, if only I opened the door wide. In that moment, a part of me wavered, the exhaustion and fear almost making me want to give up. But when I looked at Sarah, I saw the determination on her face, her dry lips still persistently chanting the spell. That pulled me back to reality, screamed loudly, using all my strength to force the silver charm straight into the crack of the door. A bright white light burst out, illuminating the entire basement. Shadows screamed and disappeared one by one. The screams were more intense than ever, echoing, shaking the whole house. The walls cracked open. Pieces of concrete fell with a clang. I thought the whole house was about to collapse, but I clenched my teeth, and held on. Sarah put all her strength into the final spell, her voice ringing like a bell, strong and decisive. In that moment, the door shook one last time and then closed. The crack of green light disappeared. The screams gradually died down, leaving only deathly silence. I collapsed to the floor, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily. Sarah collapsed beside me, exhausted. We looked at each other, our eyes filled with exhaustion but also a glimmer of hope. The cellar was completely silent. Only the light from the few remaining candles remained. I didn't know if the seal had succeeded permanently or only temporarily, but at least we had survived what seemed like the last night. When I walked upstairs, I felt the house lighten up. There was no more fishy smell, no more lurking shadows. The mirror reflected my image correctly. No more terrifying lag. But deep down, I was still uneasy. I knew that whatever was imprisoned on the other side did not accept defeat easily. And once they set their eyes on me, I would never escape this vortex. Tonight might be peaceful, but who knows if the door would open again tomorrow. After the intense ritual that felt like the world had collapsed, Sarah and I were both exhausted. We slept soundly until the next afternoon. When I woke up, I realized that the atmosphere in the house had changed. There was no more stuffy feeling, no more whispers or lurking shadows. The air was fresher, and daylight poured through the window, brightening the room. I thought everything was over. Sarah also breathed a sigh of relief, saying that perhaps the ritual had succeeded and the door had been sealed. The following days passed strangely peacefully. I went back to work, started laughing and talking with my colleagues, trying to get back to normal life. At night, I could sleep soundly without hearing any strange noises. The bruises on my body also gradually faded. No more appeared. Sarah left after a few days, leaving me with an amulet and telling me that if there was any sign of anything happening again, I was to call her immediately. I nodded, hoping that this nightmare was over, but the peace didn't last long. A week later, I was cleaning the living room when I noticed a faint handprint on the wall. It was exactly like the prints that had appeared on my skin, except this time it was printed directly on the white paint. I trembled and touched it, but as soon as my finger brushed it, the handprint disappeared. I told myself it was probably just the light, but the uneasiness came rushing back. I tried to ignore it, but that night when I looked in the mirror, I saw a shadow behind me. It stood silently and then disappeared, just like what I had witnessed before. The next morning, I went down to the basement to check. The door was still there, closed, the dark wood surface unchanged. I sighed in relief and was about to turn away when I heard the familiar 3-beat knock from behind me. The knock was so clear that it made me freeze. I pressed my ear to listen, and my heart stopped when I heard a soft whisper. It wasn't as loud as before, but gentle, like someone waiting patiently. I panicked and ran upstairs, closing the basement door tightly, but the sound still echoed in my head. From that day on, I noticed strange phenomena starting to return. Lights in the house flickered, objects were moved, cold wind blew in from unknown gaps. I kept seeing shadows flashing in my vision. The feeling of being watched once again surrounded me, making every passing moment a torture. I tried calling Sarah, but the line kept ringing busy. I left a text message asking for help, but I didn't get a response. The fear kept me from even sleeping that night. I woke up at 3 a.m., my heart pounding. I felt something standing at the end of my bed. When I turned on the light, I couldn't see anything, but the air was heavy, making it hard to breathe. I shook my head, took the silver amulet, placed it on my chest, and prayed. I lay there all night until the light of dawn came in. But just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, I heard a soft laugh from the basement. The sound was familiar, creepy, and I knew that everything I thought was over was a trick. The door had never really been completely sealed. It was just waiting for the right moment to return. I collapsed, feeling that the peace was a fragile trap. And now I had to face once again the terrifying truth that the game between me and the darkness was not over. After the brief period of peace passed, the strange phenomena began again, and this time more intense. At first, it was just a gentle tapping in the basement, but then the whole house seemed to be filled with countless strange sounds. I heard footsteps in the living room when I was alone. I heard water dripping in the kitchen even though the faucet was turned off. There were times when I could clearly hear someone calling my name from the attic where no one had ever lived. These sounds were no longer hallucinations. They echoed throughout the space, surrounding me and forcing me to listen. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard my mother's voice right next to my ear. Her voice was exactly as it had been when she was alive, gentle and loving. She whispered that I should not be afraid, that I should open the basement door and I would be reunited with her. Tears welled up in my eyes at the memory, but my mind knew it was just a trick. I screamed for it to be quiet, but the voice repeated itself, this time turning into a pitiful cry that drove me crazy. I covered my head with a blanket and shivered until dawn the next day. I contacted Sarah, but she didn't pick up. I left dozens of messages asking for help. The feeling of being abandoned made me more desperate than ever. Strange cracks began to appear in the mirror house. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a figure behind me. The image was no longer fleeting, but appeared clearly, bit by bit. Sometimes it stood right behind my shoulder, its white, soulless eyes staring into the lens. I turned my head and saw no one, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I realized that darkness had spread everywhere in this house. Another evening, I heard whispers coming from all over the walls. I put my ear to them, and they emitted a clear rhythm like an ancient scripture. I didn't understand the meaning, but each syllable made me tremble. The walls shook slightly, as if they were breathing. I stepped back and saw the mottled handprints all over the white paint. They appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye, as if teasing me. I began to feel not only watched, but also surrounded from all sides. Tried to leave the house for a day to see if I could escape that feeling. I went to a hotel in the city, trying to rest. But that night, as soon as I fell asleep, I heard the familiar 3-beat knock sound in my room. I opened my eyes and saw the same black handprint on the wall. I understood that the door was no longer confined to the basement. It was attached to me, following me everywhere. I could only face it instead of running away. When I returned home, I found the basement door ajar again. This time there was no blue light, only deep darkness inside. I stood paralyzed, my mind blank. For a moment, I heard countless voices calling my name in unison. They continued like a creepy song. I rushed upstairs, closed all the doors, but the sound still echoed in my head. I knew clearly that these were not just normal, strange phenomena. These were real paranormal stories that I was forced to experience, and I didn't know how long it would last. After the night of the calls echoing throughout the house, I began to notice a new phenomenon that was much more strange and frightening. Every mirror in the house seemed to become a portal connecting me to something that did not belong to this world. At first, it was just a very small delay in the reflection. Like when I turned my head, the reflection in the mirror remained still for a second. I thought it was due to fatigue or the light, but as time went on, the difference became more and more obvious. One time, I saw myself in the mirror smiling while my face was completely expressionless. The smile was unusually long and seemed to know that I was afraid. I tried to avoid looking in the mirror, but in this house, mirrors were everywhere. Mirrors in the bathroom, in the living room, in the wardrobe. Even the TV screen reflected my image. Every time the sky passed by at night, I saw my own eyes following me, unblinking and unmoving. One night, I decided to gather up the courage to test it. I placed a video camera facing the large mirror in the living room, then sat still in front of it. I wanted to prove that I was just hallucinating. But when I watched the video back, my heart stopped beating. The image in the mirror sat still for a long time, even though I had stood up and left the frame. And only when I had left the room did it slowly raise its head to look straight into the lens. Its lips slightly moving, something I rewound the video and read out 3 short words: "Open the door." I threw the video camera to the ground, my whole body cold. I understood that the thing in the mirror was not me. It was a part of the darkness from the other side trying to communicate. From that day on, I covered all the mirrors with black cloth. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I still heard laughter coming from behind the cloth. The laughter was soft at first, then gradually grew louder, echoing throughout the house. Every time I approached a covered mirror, the cloth fluttered as if someone inside was trying to escape. I could only run out of the room, my heart pounding. The next day I called Sarah, but she still didn't answer. I felt like I was being pushed to the limit. I tried using a silver charm on a mirror. The light from the charm reflected off the mirror and made it shake slightly, as if it was hurt. But just a few seconds later, my reflection in it distorted. My mouth opened into a wide smile, and I said inaudibly, "We are the same." I was startled, and through the mirror, the glass pieces flew everywhere. But each small piece still reflected that distorted face from every angle. I couldn't escape. No matter where I ran, that gaze still followed me from the darkness. That night, I decided to sleep in a room without a mirror, closed the door tightly and pulled the curtains. But at 3 in the morning, I woke up, feeling a strange light in the room. On the wall opposite the bed appeared a faint reflection of me, even though there was no mirror in the room. It stood still for a moment and then slowly approached. I curled up, my heart about to explode. The reflection bowed its head, its voice ringing in my head. Not through sound, but like a cold stream of thoughts. "The door is opening." I screamed, rushed up to turn on the light, but everything disappeared. The room was empty, only my own heavy breathing echoed as dawn broke. I realized I was gradually losing the boundary between reality and illusion. The door, the calls, the reflection, all merged into one approaching entity. I didn't know how long I would be conscious, but I knew one thing clearly. What was in the mirror was not just an image, but another door, another path waiting for me to enter. That night, I decided to stay home alone. Sarah couldn't come back yet, and I was too tired to go anywhere else. I locked all the windows and doors, and pulled the thick curtains to block out the darkness outside. I told myself that if I couldn't see, I wouldn't be afraid, that it all existed only in my mind. But as the night fell, I realized that silence was sometimes scarier than screaming. Sitting in the living room, I could hear my heart beat clearly and the clock ticking endlessly. The empty house echoed with my own breathing, making me feel like there was someone else in the room. I turned on the TV to fill the silence, but the screen suddenly flickered. The channels were all static, only the sound was static. In the static, I heard a vague voice repeating my name 3 times. I panicked and turned it off, but immediately the darkness enveloped me, making me shiver. I took the flashlight and checked each room, my hands shaking so much that the light was flickering. Everything was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was walking close behind me. Sometimes I could hear the creaking of the wooden floor as if accompanied by footsteps. That night, I decided to sleep in the living room instead of the bedroom. I pulled the sofa close to the wall, placed the silver amulet on my chest, and pulled the blanket over my head. But when the clock struck 3 in the morning, I was startled awake by the familiar 3-beat knock coming from the basement. I held my breath, not daring to move. The knocking repeated again and then stopped. I thought everything was over when I heard a whisper right next to my ear, clear and cold. I turned on the flashlight, but saw no one. My whole body was covered in goosebumps, my eyes straining in the darkness. I mustered up the courage to walk down a few steps to the basement. The door was still closed, but a dim blue light once again filtered through the crack. My hand tightened on the hammer I carried, my palms sweating. From inside came the sound of crying, this time a child's voice. I almost wanted to throw the door open and run in just to end this haunting, but the remaining part of my sanity pulled me back. I backed away, my heart pounding, and ran upstairs. As I slammed the basement door shut, I saw a tall, dark figure standing below me in the hallway mirror. I shuddered, realizing that I was alone in this huge house, but never truly alone. I couldn't sleep that night. I curled up on the sofa, my eyes glued to the basement door. Every time the wind whistled through the window, I imagined the door opening. I realized that I was slowly losing the line between sleep and wakefulness. The darkness in the house not only filled the space, but also invaded my thoughts. I had read stories about people alone in haunted houses and thought they were fiction. But now I was living it, a home alone nightmare that no one could understand but me. That night, it rained heavily. The sound of raindrops falling on the roof tiles seemed to fill the air. I sat close to the window, hoping that the familiar sounds of nature would cover up the fear in my heart. Rain usually brought peace, but this time it made me more nervous. Amidst the steady sound of rain, I began to hear other sounds. At first, it was just a gentle tapping sound mixed with the sound of falling rain. But the more I paid attention, the more certain I was that it was the familiar 3 tapping beats from the basement. My heart clenched, because I knew clearly that the sound was not an illusion. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, my heart pounding. When I walked past the living room, I clearly heard footsteps dragging on the wooden floor. But when I turned on the light, there was nothing but thick darkness. I quickly closed the living room door and sat down on the floor. The rain was still falling heavily, but now each drop felt like a hammer hitting my ears, mixed with the soft laughter that echoed throughout the house. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough to give me goosebumps. It sounded right behind me, then upstairs, then from the basement, as if the whole house was mocking me. When I returned to sit by the window, lightning flashed through the glass. In that moment, I saw the silhouette of a tall man standing outside, his face hidden by the rain. I jumped up and pulled the curtains back, my heart pounding. But the rain didn't stop, and every time the thunder sounded, I felt like there were more people out there, standing still, looking into the house. I was surrounded from both outside and inside. There was no safe place. I took out my phone to call Sarah, but the screen was distorted. The sound was crackling. In the midst of the crackling, I heard a whisper, this time not calling my name, but saying, "Open the door." I panicked and threw the phone aside, holding my head, shaking. I knew that the call came from the basement door, and now it had found its way into everything, even the electronics. I felt completely unprotected, like a naked man standing in the dark rain. That night, I did not dare to sleep. I sat huddled under the blanket, listening to the rain mixed with countless strange sounds. Sometimes I heard children giggling. Sometimes I heard wailing screams, all of them harmonizing into a terrifying melody. It was near dawn when the rain began to lessen that I dared to close my eyes, but immediately I found myself dreaming of the door. In my dream, it was wide open, darkness from the other side pouring out and swallowing the entire house. I struggled, but could not escape. Before I woke up, I heard a barbaric laughter that echoed above the sound of the rain. I opened my eyes with a start, my whole body drenched in sweat. Outside, the rain had stopped, but in my heart, I knew the real storm was still waiting. The next morning, after waking up from a terrible dream, I went down to the living room and almost collapsed. On the white wall in front of me appeared red lines of words that looked like they were written in fresh blood. They were crooked, but I could still read them, each letter forming my name, repeating over and over again across the wall. I trembled as I approached, but as soon as my hand touched them, the red substance blurred as if it was still wet. I recoiled, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to tear my chest apart. I quickly ran to get a towel to wipe it off, but the more I wiped, the darker the words became, spreading across the wall like an open wound. In my panic, I realized that the words began to change. Each character twisted and turned into a complete sentence. "Open the door for us." I screamed loudly and threw the towel on the floor, my whole body shaking. I understood that the thing was not only present behind the door, but it had found a way to directly affect the world I was living in. My wall was now like a mirror reflecting the nightmare on the other side. I could no longer distinguish between reality and illusion. That night I did not dare to sleep in the living room anymore, but locked the door and retreated to the bedroom. But as soon as I lay down, I heard a screeching sound on the wall. I turned on the light and saw the red lines appear again, this time in my room. They ran along the wall, flashing as if written by an invisible hand that was continuously bolding. I cowered in the corner, my eyes glued to each word that gradually turned into a distorted image. A thin face with white eyes staring straight at me. I closed my eyes tightly, praying that when I opened them, everything would disappear. But when I opened them again, that face was still there, only it was closer. I screamed in despair, grabbed the fallen cross from the previous time and pressed it tightly to my chest. In a moment, the distorted face disappeared, the lines faded. But only a few minutes later, they reappeared, this time imprinted on the ceiling. I was almost crazy, knowing that I had no way out. I tried to call Sarah, but the phone only made a long, screeching sound. In the screeching sound, I heard the familiar words, "Open the door." I hung up the phone. My whole body was exhausted. The next day, I was so tired that I couldn't even leave the house. I sat in the dark, watching the lines of text constantly change around me. They didn't just mention my name anymore, but also wrote down memories I wanted to forget, mistakes I had made. I trembled as I saw them record my deepest thoughts that no one knew. I knew clearly that the entity had burrowed deep into my mind, using my memories and sins to torment me. I had nowhere to hide, no way to hide. The house had become an open book, each page written by it in blood and darkness. I sat silently for hours, my eyes following each changing word as if hypnotized. When I realized it, the lines of text had formed the image of a door identical to the basement door, but larger than ever. It took up the entire wall, the doorframe standing out in a bright red substance. For a moment, I felt like if I took a step towards it, I would pass through the wall and into the other world. I held my head, screaming for help, but the only response was a wild laughter that echoed throughout the house. I knew the game wasn't over yet, and the real door was slowly opening in my mind. After several nights of being haunted by the bloody words, I decided to leave the house. I thought that if I got away from the place, I could temporarily escape the control of the door. I drove to the outskirts, to a small forest where I used to camp when I was young. I brought a tent, some food, and hoped that the sounds of nature would help me regain my peace. When I set foot on the damp ground, smelled the dry leaves, and heard the chirping of insects, I felt a little relieved. I told myself that in this forest, there would definitely be no knocking or whispering sounds. I set up my tent near the edge of the forest, lit a fire, and sat watching the flames flicker. The wind blew through the trees, creating a natural music that relaxed me. It had been a long time since I felt my heart beat slow down to normal. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, but as the night fell and the sky filled with stars, I began to realize that something was wrong. The sound of insects gradually stopped. The bustling forest became unusually quiet. The fire in the woodpile suddenly flickered and quickly died out, even though I still had a lot of dry wood. I sat up straight, my hand gripping the flashlight tightly in the quiet darkness. I heard a 3-beat knock echoing in the distance. I froze. My heart stopped for a few seconds. I knew this sound, had heard it hundreds of times from the basement of the house. I shined the light everywhere, but could only see rustling trees. A moment later, in the clearing in the middle of the forest, I saw it. An old wooden door, rusty iron frame, standing tall between the tree trunks. It was exactly like the door in my basement, except that now it was present in the wild. I shivered and stepped back, my whole body cold. I understood that I could not run away. The door was attached to me, and it would appear wherever I set foot. I sat down on the ground, my mind spinning. I heard whispers coming from the door, mixed with the wind whistling through the woods. They called my name, the voices constantly changing from familiar to unfamiliar. Sometimes it was my mother's voice, sometimes it was Michael's, sometimes even my own voice echoed back. I covered my ears with both hands, but the sound still echoed in my head. I screamed in despair, threw the flashlight away, but the darkness was even thicker. I wanted to run, but my legs felt tied. From the crack in the door, a dim green light spread throughout the forest, shining on the tree trunks, distorting them into strange shapes. I tried to crawl into the tent, zipped the tent door shut, hugged my chest, but the 3-beat knock sounded right on the flimsy roof. I looked up and saw a dark shadow imprinted through the fabric, tall with long arms touching the ground. It stood still, only letting out heavy breathing. I closed my eyes and prayed, but when I opened them, I saw countless bold handprints appearing on the tent fabric, moving all over the surface. I knew I was surrounded. I had nowhere else to run, and for the first time I realized the terrifying truth that the door was not just in my house. It was a part of me. It had been with me all my life. I sat huddled in the tent, trembling with each beat, the hands imprinted on the thin fabric moving constantly as if wanting to tear it apart. The 3-beat knocks sounded continuously, this time not just in one place, but from all four directions. I clearly heard soft laughter mixed with heavy breathing, as if there was an invisible crowd surrounding me. Outside, the green light from the door in the middle of the forest spread out, shining on the tree trunks, transforming them into thin, waiting figures. I pulled the blanket over my head, but each whisper still poured straight into my ears, urging me to open the tent and step out. In my despair, I remembered what Sarah had told me, that I should never let myself be in complete silence. I turned on my phone, played a loud song, but as soon as the melody sounded, it was distorted. The voice turned into a scream of pain. I panicked and turned it off. The tent fell into absolute darkness. At that moment, the roof of the tent sank as if something heavy was pressing on it. I looked up and saw clearly the shape of a distorted face pressed against the fabric, white eyes staring at me. I screamed, holding the cross out in front of me, but the face only disappeared for a few seconds before reappearing in another corner. I knew I was surrounded. There was nowhere to Rooney gathered all my courage to open the tent and rush out. The forest night air was cold. The smell of damp earth was strong. In front of me, the door stood tall between the tree trunks. A dim green light was shining out. Around it, countless blurry figures stood crowded together, all turned towards me. Their faces were pale, their eyes were empty, their mouths were wide open, as if screaming, but no sound came out. I retreated step by step, but behind me were also dense figures standing. I was sandwiched between the circle of ghosts and the haunted door. I trembled, hugging the amulet, screaming for Sarah. But only the endless echoes from the deep forest answered, just as I thought I would be pulled into the door. A flash of lightning tore across the sky. In that moment of brilliant light, I saw the entire group of figures disappear, leaving only the door alone. I rushed towards the car, my feet slipping on the wet ground. When I looked back, the door was still there, but now opened a little, revealing a deep darkness inside. From it emanated a cold that made me shiver. I rushed into the car, locked the door, and tried to start it. The engine sputtered and wouldn't start. The clock on my phone jumped wildly. In the rearview mirror, I saw dozens of pale faces appear behind the car, all staring at me. Finally, the engine started. I stepped on the gas and drove out of the forest. My heart was pounding, sweat soaked my back. I only stopped when I reached the main road, took a deep breath like someone who had just escaped death. But in the rearview mirror, I could still see the faint blue light of the door in the distance, as if watching my every move. I understood that I could not hide forever. The door was no longer confined to the house. It was tied to my fate. Wherever I went, whether I camped in the woods or hid somewhere, it would appear. And I knew that tonight was just the beginning of an endless journey of haunting. After leaving the woods, I drove back to the city in a state of panic. I knew I couldn't run away anymore, because the door would always come back. Instead, I decided to find out where it came from. I remembered what my father had told me when I was a child. Our house was built on a plot of land, where many mysterious deaths had occurred. At the time, I thought it was just a childish joke, but now I understood that it could be an important clue. I went to the old library in the city, looking for records of the land where the house stood. Old, discolored newspapers and dusty legal documents were brought out. The more I looked, the more creepy I became. It turned out that at the beginning of the last century, this land had been the site of a secret prison. Prisoners were sent here to test occult rituals. Many disappeared without a trace, and survivors told of a strange door in the ground that led to a dark place. I shuddered when I realized that the description was exactly like the door. I was facing an old record describes a sealing ritual. It is said that a group of prisoners were sacrificed to keep the door closed. Their blood and souls were tied to the door to keep it from opening. But over the years, when the prison was abandoned, no one continued the ritual, and the door slowly began to awaken. When the land was sold, people leveled it and built houses without knowing that the sealed door was still underneath. My house could have been built right on that spot. The coincidence made my whole body shiver. I took those documents home and read them all night. The more I read, the more I realized that my fate had long been tied to this secret. The last lines in the old diary read, "The door will find someone to open it, and that person will never escape." I sat there, my heart pounding, because the sentence seemed to be directed at me. From the moment I discovered it, everything was arranged to drag me into this vortex. The next day, I tried to meet the elders who live near the old land. An old woman tremblingly told me that when she was a child, she had heard her parents talk about the door of the spirits. It was rumored that every night, people heard wailing and 3-beat knocking from the ground. Many families who had lived in that area had fled in fear. Some had disappeared without a trace. When I asked about the sealing ritual, she shook her head, only saying that those who had participated had long since died. Her voice dropped when she mentioned the phrase, "The door always seeks someone to open it." I left with the feeling of hearing a final warning that night. I sat in the living room, staring at the documents spread out on the table. The sound of the wind whistling outside the window mingled with the familiar whispering in my head. I knew that all the pieces of the puzzle had come together. The door had not just appeared in my basement by chance. It was predestined hundreds of years ago, and I was just the next one to be chosen. The thought made my blood run cold. I closed my eyes and sighed, knowing that from now on I was no longer an ordinary person. I had become a living witness to one of the most horrifying true stories, and could also be the next victim. I sat in the dark room with a pile of old documents spread out on the table, each yellowed page like a burden pressing down on my heart. The truth I had just discovered made everything even more horrifying. The prisoners who were sacrificed in the past were never released. Their souls were tied to the door as part of a sealing ritual. And then decades later, when the sealing weakened, all the hatred and pain rose up. I understood that what I had been hearing all this time was not just knocking or whispering, but the screams of souls demanding justice. They were not seeking forgiveness, they were seeking revenge. Night fell. I could clearly feel the change in the air. The sound of the wind whistling through the window was like the sighs of dozens of people, mixed with the sounds of moaning. Red letters appeared on the wall again. This time, not a request to open the door, but an accusation. They wrote down the names of the jailers, the men who had killed them, and those who had left them to die in the darkness. I watched the scribbles change, realizing that I was now not just being dragged in, but being forced to witness the centuries-long revenge. In my fitful sleep, I found myself standing in a dark hallway. On either side were long rows of thin figures, their eyes white, their mouths wide open as if screaming. They reached out to me, their cold fingers touching my skin, making me ache. They said nothing but the repeated whisper, "Revenge." I woke with a start, a cold sweat running down my spine, but when I looked down at my hands, the handprints were still there. I trembled, realizing that the dream was not just an illusion. It was real, an extension of my resentment. The next night, as I tried to calm myself by turning on the lights all over the house, the electricity suddenly went out. The house was plunged into total darkness. In the silence, I heard footsteps coming from everywhere. The basement, the stairs, the hallway, the bedroom, all echoed with footsteps like a marching band. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, my hand gripping the hammer tightly, but my feet couldn't move. The shadows gradually appeared, no longer appearing and disappearing, but standing clearly in groups, their eyes empty but full of hatred. I knew they didn't want to tease me anymore. They wanted me to feel their pain. I retreated to the main door, but it wouldn't open. The lock was as hard as if welded. I turned my head and saw shadows standing densely, blocking all the entrances. At that moment, the basement door shook violently. Blue light burst out. Cold air filled the house. All the shadows turned toward the door at the same time, screaming. The screams echoed so violently that the walls of the house shook. I understood that now I was just a witness to their revenge. They didn't care who I was. They just wanted to drag me into the vortex so I could suffer with them. I collapsed on the floor, feeling my strength slowly leave me. In that moment, I realized the harsh truth. I was not their enemy, but I was never an outsider either. I was just a pawn chosen to witness and continue their hatred. And once the door was completely opened, I would be swept away with them, becoming part of that endless group of vengeful souls. The thought made my blood run cold, and I knew that the next night would be the final turning point, where darkness would decide my fate. The last night came in an eerie silence. No more knocking, no more whispering. The house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I sat in the living room, the yellow light illuminating my haggard face. Deep down, I knew this silence was only a sign of something worse. As the clock struck midnight, the ground beneath my feet shook. From the basement came a rumbling sound, as if the walls were being torn apart. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked down the stairs. The door appeared before me, no longer ajar. It shook violently, blue light filling the basement. I saw cracks radiating from the doorframe, the cold air blowing thickly, numbing my skin. In that moment, I knew all the seals had been broken. Before I could react, the door swung open, blinding blue light pouring out like a wave. I collapsed to the floor, my hands covering my face. When I looked up, I saw dozens of figures walking out. They were thin, their faces pale, their eyes empty. All of them were screaming, their screams merging into a storm of sound that pierced my mind. I tried to retreat, but behind me, black figures also appeared, crawling up from the floor. They surrounded me, cold hands grabbed my arms and pulled me down. I struggled and screamed, clinging tightly to the stair doorframe. But there were too many of them. The power from the hatred of hundreds of souls almost swept me away. In a moment of despair, I raised the silver talisman, shouted my name loudly, and begged for the light to protect me. A small white light flashed from the talisman, but compared to the sea of darkness, it was like a firefly in the long night. The souls screeched, pulling me into the door that was wide open like the mouth of an abyss. I saw in that endless blue light was another world, an empty space filled with mist. Screams echoed in all directions. I saw the tall figure that had haunted me for so long standing in the center, his dark eyes watching me. He reached out, his long hand almost touching. I knew that if I was pulled through, I would never return. In the last moment, I remembered Sarah, remembered what she had said about courage being the only weapon left. I screamed again, pouring all my strength into the silver talisman. The light from it exploded, making the space tremble. I don't remember what happened next. All I know is that when I opened my eyes, I was in the living room, the morning sunlight pouring through the window. The basement door was still there, but it was closed, the surface scorched as if it had been through a fire. There was no more knocking, no more whispering. I sat up, my heart pounding, not knowing if I had truly won or just escaped. I looked at the silver talisman in my hand. It was broken into many pieces. I sighed, knowing that this battle was not over. But at least I lived to tell the tale now. I sit here and write everything down, every detail, every nightmare. I want others to know that what I went through was real. Maybe one day the door will open again. Maybe I won't have the strength to resist. But I leave this story as a warning. If you hear a triple knock in the night, if you see a door where it shouldn't be, do everything you can to stay away. Because once it chooses you, you will never be yourself again. This is not just a scary story. This is fate.